Hello, my name is Ray Edmonds. Welcome to my watercolor workshop. Today we're going to do a demonstration of a simple landscape painting in watercolors. In recent videos I've talked about seeing basic forms and shapes, square, rectangle, circle, triangle, and an oval in landscapes. So see if you can see those today as we demonstrate. Now this is the picture that we're going to be painting today, so hang in there as we begin. This is the drawing is already completed for lack of time. What we're going to be doing now is adding masking fluid to the white birch trees so they'll be able to stand out. The masking fluid, if you're familiar with it, you already know that it covers the white paper, which allows you to paint over it and save the white of the paper for later on. It's like a rubber masking fluid, and after it dries you can paint over it without having to paint around those trees. So we'll apply some of that for a little bit here. We want to preserve certain areas. The white of the birch trees is the most important part of the painting. The snow, it's a snow scene. The snow is a large area, so we'll basically just stay away from that as we paint. We won't have to cover that in any way. It's mainly where the tree line in the back and the sky is going to be. That's what we're trying to cover at this point. And you'll see all that in just a moment. This is a very simple painting, just a simple scene that most of you could do. We will have a dark background over the hill to give contrast to the snow in the foreground, and then some rocks in the foreground and a tree on the side, sort of stop your eye at that point, and then a sleigh and a horse, a man bringing home a Christmas tree for the annual holiday season. Now we've applied the masking fluid, and we're allowing it to dry. We will fast forward through this. Now we're wetting the sky in the background with clear water, and be adding just some light cobalt blue just to wet the sky and to give it a light coating. There won't be much going on in the sky, so just a light coating of light blue cobalt will help us at this point. Just applying water basically at this point to wet all that area. This will be, the background will be wet in wet. This is a demonstration of several techniques. Now we're applying the cobalt blue, as you can see, just enough to give it the light tint of sky. As I said, the sky is not important in this particular picture. Most of it will be going on in the wooded scene and the foreground, so we don't want to say too much back there. It's important in a wet in wet application to keep the area moist so that your paints can smoothly run into the areas that you want them to. Now in the area, the right side of the picture over the hill there, we're going to be applying some dark colors, which will serve to add contrast with the white of the birch trees a little later on. This particular color is cobalt blue and some mauve or violet. Now we're adding yellow. I think this is Indian yellow, but any light yellow will do at this point. When you see, we're just painting over those trees, not necessarily worried about the trees because the masking fluid is protecting those. Sometimes I don't necessarily have to paint over them, but in this case you can just dab the paint wherever you want. Doesn't make any difference. Right over those white birch trees. We're adding yellow first, and then we're going to add some other colors to give it, it's a winter scene, but there's enough fall color still remaining to give it some highlights. We'll slowly add more violet on the right side, and also some burnt sienna to give it some rustic color of fading red. This is burnt sienna that I'm applying now. And this background is still moist, and you can see the paint begin to spread, which is part of the beauty of wet and wet application. Since the tree line is much in the distance, it is sort of a blurred view of those. You don't want sharp lines back here. Adding some darker hues now of some of the purples, mauves. The idea is to get as much color back in there, particularly a darker color. The value at this point is a fairly dark value, not the darkest of values that we're going to have yet, but still on a scale of 0 to 10, this would be probably a 7 or 8 in there that I'm applying at the moment. The reason for that, of course, is to give contrast to the white of the trees. The darker the background, the whiter the trees will appear, and the brighter the snow will appear in the foreground. So all of this application back here is sort of underpainting, and really is necessary to give the whole painting its effect in the end, because it is about the snow and in the foreground and the white of the birch trees accenting that. In order to do that, you need the darker contrast in the background. So various blues. You can use almost any of the blues and any of the yellows, any of the burnt siennas or red mixed with some umbers or some blues. It doesn't make much difference back there. the idea is to put some color back there. Same time, to make it look fairly realistic, but it's not a sharp image back there. We have to keep that in mind. We'll be adding some trees back there after it dries, but during this time, of course, it's wet and wet, and we're really not too particular about drawing things that look like trees. We're just applying color. See, I'm painting right over the masking fluid, which is protecting the white of those birch trees. And all of this background painting is necessary. It may look like I'm spending a great deal of time in that area, and probably could do it faster. I'm just dabbing in colors at this point. Darker violets. Now we're going to move further to the sky, or rather the background mountains or hills in the far left back. Those are could be hills, could be just some mountains in the distance. Really doesn't make any difference at this point. It's just something to add, to fill in some color in that background. This is a rolling hills type of landscape. Now we're beginning to work on the snow a little bit. One of the techniques is you can always turn your paper upside down, and what I'm doing now is speeding the tape, the video up so that you can see without the long pauses between, because nothing exciting is going on, but we're laying in light washes of color at this point to define the hills. See the little valleys and the hill coming down to the left, the dark shaded areas. Most people think that snow is white, and it is, but it also reflects a lot of colors in nature. So rather than just a white sheet of paper, we use the tinting of shadows to show the contours of it. Painting in now some of the pine trees, evergreen trees in the background. That will further enhance those white birches when we remove the masking fluid. Also helps to give contrast to the snow in the mid-ground and foreground. Some more an evergreen on this side of the hill, so to speak. The others are all sort of over the hill slightly. Scraping in with little I think I was scratching in some foreground branches, sort of defining more areas there now. Still adding some colors to the background. Adding some shadows of the pine trees and some of the trees in the background. Enough of that woods casting a slight shadow. This is a sunny day, even though it's winter, and so you're going to be seeing some of the shadows, and basically that's a technique to help you see the contours of by shadowing some of those areas to give some contour to the snow landscape. Adding in the shadows of the trees, the birch trees, which really you can't see yet, but now starting to define some of the foreground shadows. Shadows under the sleigh and in the road and the bottom of that hillside. We'll be working on that. That sort of defines where the road is, even though it's snow covered. There are some tracks in the snow. There are some where the hill drops down to the road. There is some like it's perhaps been pushed back or something. So we'll darken that area a little bit. That helps to define where the road is. Now working on the tree a little bit, and this is really just the undercoating, the first few coats of paint for that tree. A light umber mixed with a little bit of burnt sienna. A little darker tones now being added. This is burnt umber and perhaps a touch of blue or violet mixed in there. I'm not going to do a great deal to the tree, but we do need to give it some texture. At this point, that's what I'm doing. And watercolors, of course, tend to dry lighter. That's always comes with experience to know how dark you need to make them, but you also draw a paint in layers. As a first wash, we call them washes, a light wash, and then maybe a little darker wash a little later on, which could change the color or darken the color that's there. And that's sort of what's happened to that tree. I'm going to work on the sleigh and the horse at this point. The horse basically doesn't have a lot of definition. It's just going to be a single wash of a dark color to define the horse. It's again at a distance, so you don't see too much detail other than the outline of the horse. And the man, of course, will be the same way. At the distance you're seeing this, the person is not defined very, doesn't have to be defined very well. Putting in the sleigh now. These are some burnt sienna with some reds in them. I believe it's turned out just a little more umber than I wanted, so I added a little red wash over top of that to give it a little more of a reddish tone. And the man's coat, of course, is red, which is always wise in the winter, running around the woods in case there are deer hunters around. Painting in some rocks now in the foreground. There are a number of ways you can do rocks. This is just one of them. Other videos will show how you might do some others, but these rocks, while they're in the foreground, are not extremely important. They serve to give you some reference to frame the picture, adding some shadows to the trees, shadows to the rocks, still some shadows, little dips in the snow, little contour here and there. And I hope you can see some of the light washes or shading that's been in the snow. Sometimes it's a little difficult to see the subtle shading. Right over that little hill there are some brushy areas. That helps to define that hill as well by putting in those little green bushes or evergreens or whatever they are over the hill, adding a little tint of yellow or ochre back in the bag. Now I'm adding the Christmas tree. This is what it's all about. The man's bringing the Christmas tree home for the holidays. So it's a very simple picture. Probably took about an hour and a half. You can do it actually faster than that. That does not include the drawing time, of course. A picture like this, outside of the sleigh and the horse, very, very light sketching. You don't need to do much drawing. You need to do a little drawing to decide for the composition of it so that it's balanced. But most of these things you don't really need to draw to see what they are. You could draw trees, paint trees without having to draw them, etc. And certainly the land and snow itself. But you would need to draw some form for the horse and the sleigh. Now we're at the point where we're just filling in some shaded areas, highlighting here and there just to give some form for the contours of the hill. There would be, as the snow has its ups and downs, there would be some slight shading here and there. Always keep a tissue or a cloth, or in my case I usually use a paper towel to dab here and there where you may have put down too much paint. You can remove some. Now what I'm doing at the moment is removing the masking tape. You could rub it with your finger, but don't like to do that. It would come off, but I have an eraser, a special eraser, which removes the masking fluid. And now I'm adding some form to the left side of the trees, the dark side of the birch, and we'll be adding some dark values near black. We don't use black paint, we mix black and watercolors. So this is some ultramarine blue and some perhaps Payne's gray is in there. I didn't really look. I just picked some things up off my palette and made them dark. This is not that critical on this narrow tree like it is. If it was a large tree in the foreground, be a little more particular. But we're just outlining the birch trees now, since they are the main values are black and white in a birch tree, at least at this distance that we're seeing. So we're coming down really to the end of our demonstration. We do have some highlighting to do. There would be some things in the background, mountain distance hills. They need to be brought out a little closer, and some details in the foreground. So, but you'll begin to see now the picture taking form. These little things, working on the trees, these little details is what makes the picture begin to pop out and makes it seem more realistic rather than just some poles back there. So we're putting in some limbs in both in the background trees, adding some trees in near the hill back there. We're adding some on the far back side. I've already scratched in some white birch trees way back in the hills. Did that earlier with a razor blade. Don't need to scratch the surface at that point, but just removing the paint, so to speak, while it was wet. That was still wet back there when I was doing that. Putting in lightly some very light trees in the background. Just sort of filling it in, making it a little more realistic. Again, you see how simple this is. This is really a beginner's kind of watercolor if you do it step by step. And I invite you to do that, to replay this and try it yourself. The tree needed a little more texturizing. Now putting in some of the shades, more shading of the rocks and in the foreground, using some of the blues for the shade. Working on the rocks, the texture of the rocks a little bit more. As I said, these rocks are not that important, but so don't need to detail them too much. Just you don't want really the eye, the audience's or the viewer's eye to lock on those rocks and say, oh, how realistic and how well done they are. Really, they're just there to serve as a frame for the picture. The main subject is, of course, the horse and sleigh and the birch trees, contrasted by some of the other trees in the landscape. So just adding some little details now to make it look more realistic. Some of the grasses that I just put in some more here and there. At this point, you don't want to overwork your picture, but you want to make it as realistic as you can. You're not drawing in every blade of grass. You're just flicking in some twigs here and there. Making a little more contrast on the back side of that rock since the sun is on the opposite side. Putting the whip in the farmer's hand, and often I'll use since this picture is the original size is about a 9 by 12 thereabouts. The image is rather small, so the actual whip itself will be put in by an ink process using a ballpoint ink. So now we're looking at it to see if there's any other little details, trying to pull out the values, making them a little stronger here and there, looking at them, fixing the man's hat. And I saw at this point that that little hill in the background, that mountain, needed to be a little darker because your eye sort of just blurred between the sky and the hill at that point. Had the sky been darker, more solid blue, which you could have made it do, then you wouldn't perhaps had to have that middle value back there. But since the sky is rather light, that middle value of that faraway mountain hill helps to keep your eye focused on the foreground hill. Now putting in these little details again, making it look a little more realistic. Shadows of the objects, trees, and so forth. Defining the road a little bit more, even though it's snow covered, someone has traveled that road before. So we're coming down to the last few minutes of our video here, demonstration, so we'll be able to put in a few more flecks of representing trees, and a little more contour here. I'm drawing in the man, actually the whip of the man, defining some of the points of the sleigh again. And taking off the tape now, which always makes it was taped down around it, which always makes a great border. And here you see the final picture. I've added just a few other things, the fence behind the sleigh there, to give it better proportion. Well, I've enjoyed doing this simple demonstration of a landscape, and I hope that you could see the forms we've talked about: the square, the rectangle, the triangle, and the circle and the oval. Where did they appear in this? I hope you saw them. If you like this video, please subscribe and click the like button. It helps me. Make a comment at the end, future videos you'd like to see, or comments on this particular video, and I'll be happy to do what I can. Thank you for joining me.